All right. Welcome everyone. Alcor is pleased to welcome you all to today's webinar. Hope everyone is having a wonderful summer. So far, Alcor is a global cloud advisory and implementation services company serving Fortune 500, government agencies, and other leading organizations in multiple industry verticals across the Americas, Canada, and India. Alcor is also a ServiceNow Gold Services and Silver Sales Partner. We partner with leading technology companies, including FireEye, Microsoft, Dell, Incorta, MuleSoft, and BigPanda. We advise leading businesses on cloud platforms, architecture, enterprise service management, and integrating IT service delivery. We also provide business process consulting to capture, re-engineer, and improve processes that can easily be automated to deliver real value. The Alcor consulting team has excellence in business strategy, cloud technology, and organizational change management. Our ongoing webinar series is designed to inform, enlighten, and start discussions within your own organizations. If you require any additional information after listening to today's webinar, please reach out to us through our website, www.alcortech.com. Today's webinar is also on social media. You can follow, comment, and get regular updates for today's webinar with the hashtag AlcorWebinar. That's hashtag or number sign, ALCORWEBINAR. We also have time reserved at the end of the webinar for Q&A, so please feel free to type any questions into the questions section of the GoToWebinar dashboard. Today's webinar topic is Journey to the Center of the CMDB, presented by Aleks Dmitrovic. Aleks is Alcor's Senior Vice President of Alcor Canada and is a results-focused strategic consultant and organizational leader with over 20 years of experience, focused on driving strategic, advisory, solution design, transformation, and operational excellence for customers and clients. Aleks is a certified ITIL v3 expert, Microsoft certified system engineer, and Cisco certified network administrator. I'll now turn the webinar over to Aleks.
Thank you very much, Jeff, and good afternoon, folks. Good morning to the folks further out on the West Coast. Thank you, Jeff, for that introduction. So today we're going to be talking about the journey to the center of the CMDB, journey to the center of the universe of your organizational and enterprise systems environments. A lot of interest with customers on this topic, so we decided to look at this from the perspective of why we need the CMDB, some of the driving factors, some of the driving burning issues around establishing a CMDB, how we approach the CMDB, and what are some of the things that we need to do to actually populate and manage our CMDB. Wanted to just to review quickly, as Jeff noted, we're a ServiceNow partner in USA and Canada and Asia Pac as well. We're Gold Services and a Gold Sales Partner. And we've got competencies in a lot of verticals, including things like security operations, CSM, HR, GRC, ITOM, and ITSM. And probably the most important story for us is we've got a wonderful set of customers, and we have a consistent high CSAT score with all of the engagements that we've done with our customers, that we continue to partner with our customers on their journey. Work with a number of great customers across a number of various verticals, everything from public sector through to healthcare, financial, retail, high tech, etc. And Alcor has enabled cloud architecture, part of our enabling cloud approach. Leverage that enterprise system work, that ServiceNow. Look at all of the systems and the information that are available to interact with and touch point with ServiceNow, and give folks across the enterprise the opportunity to leverage the best of technology, the best of cloud, to drive efficiencies and effectiveness across the enterprise. So we'll get into, as a starting point, why the CMDB. A lot of folks want CMDB. They've heard of the CMDB. They believe they need the CMDB, but a lot of our customers have difficulty really kind of articulating some of the driving factors that are important to understand and establish in the CMDB, because it's really going to establish the structure and the approach and the value of the CMDB. So we start right from the very beginning. And this is one of my favorite quotes by Theodore Levitt. People don't want quarter-inch drills. They want quarter-inch holes. What our customers are looking for are results. They're looking for value. They're not looking for a shiny tool. And the opportunity here is to really focus in on the value and the results as a starting point when you think about CMDB, to ensure that you get value out of any technology, any integrations, any work that you do in the CMDB space. So we'll look at high level some of the drivers strategically and operationally across the organization. Executives have a tremendous amount of pressure from shareholders, from the marketplace itself, to ensure that they're competitive, that they're able to adapt to changing market conditions. And really the only way to do that is to embrace technology and cloud technology specifically in the last number of years, to understand all of their technology assets, to understand how they help them deliver results to the market, to their shareholders, to their customers, and to really make decisions based on some up-to-date information, and to allow them to be fluid and flexible based on, as you said, changing market conditions. Internally within organizations, management need ways to figure out how to charge back work, how to establish an economy of work, how to manage vendors and technology in a meaningful way, and to provide employees with the right tools to be more productive. Companies today find that they need to devote 70–80% of their time and their budget maintaining existing investments, keeping the lights on, if you will, without the appropriate insights to understand how to best manage and distribute those budgets based on business needs. Organizations are finding that they're spending money in areas that aren't driving towards those strategic goals that executives are setting out. And probably your most important asset outside of technology is your people, and your folks are having a tough time getting good information to make decisions. It's very difficult to understand who does what, and it's really difficult to understand how to get things done. An interesting study out of the U.S. U.S. organizations wasted $30 billion on unused software. As a result, resources that could have been put towards better use and more meaningful use haven't been purchased. The CMDB at the foundation of all these conversations is going to help you get some of those insights and to understand how to make those decisions in a much more meaningful way. So it's very important for us as organizations to understand these factors, and to ensure that when we do initiate a CMDB initiative, when we do maintain our CMDB, that we're realizing the value that is called out by these folks. A lot of organizations are also looking to understand how do we interact with other parts of the organization, with our vendors, the different types of contracts that we have in place, the different types of technology we have in place. It's very difficult today to understand the business service mapping across an organization. Without a CMDB, to be able to link all of your technology assets, all of your process assets, your people assets, with service level agreements, operational level agreements, to understand the upstream and the downstream impact of making decisions, of managing risk, of managing security, of managing just the distribution of work. It's almost impossible to do so without an effective and comprehensive enterprise CMDB, enterprise configuration management system, and as you'll see in a second, a federated enterprise CMDB as well. So the key then again is to understand, and understanding why is to understand some of the the key definitions within this context. A couple of terms that I'll talk about today: the IT service model blueprint. Setting up a CMDB to have an inventory of physical assets is not enough. It doesn't drive the value that's required in the organization. You have to establish a blueprint that's going to allow you to talk about services, talk about changes to technology, understanding the configuration, the differences, the baselines. All those things need to be defined well in order to meet these needs that we've called out. We need to understand the differences between the various functions of configuration items versus IT assets. Assets themselves are a little bit different than configuration items. They're two sides of the same coin. Configuration item is how systems are configured, what the relationships are to other configuration items. And not all assets are configuration items. Some assets not likely to be managed by CIs are monitors, printers, servers, for example. Whereas on the IT asset side, we're looking at the value, the financial value, the contractual compliance information. It's going to allow us to understand whether we have economy of scale, whether we're making the right buying decisions, whether we are using the technology that we've invested in, and if we're actually in compliance with some of the licenses that we have in place. And as I mentioned, not all CIs are assets, not all assets are CIs. You may have an asset that you want to track from a financial perspective, but you're not interested in it from a purely technology perspective. And then the concept of CMDB versus CMS and the federated CMDB. We may have one CMDB, which is frankly highly unlikely. A lot of organizations have multiple sources of information, multiple systems. What we see in a system of enterprise system of work like ServiceNow is a federated CMDB CMS approach to collecting all of that information and processing in a way that allows you to interact both internally with your organization, externally with your vendors, and externally with multiple sources of system data. So important things to understand as we really realize the value of why we want to go with the CMDB. And some of the key performance indicators or metrics that can effectively operating, managing, designing a CMDB really come under three general areas: cost, control, and support. We want to make sure that we maintain costs and licenses within budget. We want to lower our costs. We want to maximize our investment in technology. The only way to do that is to have a clear indication of what we have in place, how it's being used, what the importance of that technology is, and to be able to understand who provides that technology and who supports that technology. We want to make sure that we have a high level of accuracy. We want to make sure that we are tracking and auditing the information that we have, and we want to be able to understand any anomalies. As you'll see in a little bit, the actual management and implementation of CMDB has to focus on some of these key areas. And we also want to be able to provide a level of support across the organization so that we understand how configuration items or assets or endpoints or nodes, whatever you want to call them, how they impact the way that we do work, the way that we deliver work and value to our customers, and as we said, value to our shareholders. So in summary, return on investment. The reason why we're looking to do the CMDB is enhanced visibility. We need to understand the makeup of all of our technology by business lines. It's not enough to know that we have 50 servers. We need to know how they impact the way that we deliver value to our customers. We want improved availability. We want to leverage machine learning as much as possible to reduce event noise and have the ability to really focus in on the things that are important to us. We want to be able to have increased agility, automate proactively, and remediate service issues in a meaningful way. And we want to have business relationship mapping, business impact analysis of all of our IT infrastructure issues. So a lot of tremendous value to focus on as we start our CMDB journey. And the outer ring of that journey really is the why, the return on investment discussion, and making sure that you have great discussions with folks across your organization and your partners to ensure that that is being captured. And those data points are really established within the context of the CMDB. The next part of what we're going to talk about is how do I build that CMDB. I understand now the importance of it. I understand all the touch points. I understand what I'm trying to achieve with that CMDB. How do I build a scalable enterprise structure that will allow me to realize those benefits? And the first thing that I like to call out anytime I have a CMDB discussion is don't let perfect be the enemy of good. This guy here, Voltaire, you might have heard of him, that's his saying. It holds so true with the CMDB. Trying to achieve 100% compliance, completeness, up-to-date information would technically be impossible. Not only because it's not feasible from a number of different perspectives, but the CMDB is very fluid. We want to be able to capture anomalies. We want to be able to see change in time. We want to be able to see things that are outliers. Having a comprehensive database that is static is not going to give us the value that we were looking to achieve. And as such, we shouldn't focus just on being perfect. Our CMDB is going to change, and we want it to be good enough to make the right decisions at the right times, and that we can react in the appropriate ways. So I'll start by looking at the concept of federated CMDB as it comes from a design perspective, as it comes from realizing those values. And we start from the bottom and we look at all the data sources that we have out there. And we'll cover some of these in greater detail. But we have a number of different sources of data out there, be it processes, be it systems, be it folks, people, be it vendors. We're going to have a lot of information that we need to bring into this federated, integrated CMDB so that we can leverage that data, we can apply that data to decisions that we need to make, and we can use that data in the course of execution of some of the things that we do across the organization. So before we can really get full value out of that, we take the value discussion, the why factors that we discussed earlier, and we apply those across a data integration layer. We want to make sure that we're mapping metadata, we're mapping, we're normalizing data as it comes through, we're applying context information such as PCI compliance, such as SOX compliance, financial information, legal context, business context to some of that data so that when it comes into our CMDB, what we're representing is a portfolio, service catalog perspective. We're presenting a service model perspective. We're looking at capturing all of the information that would support service release and service change, and really mapping all the information that will allow folks who leverage this information to make the appropriate decisions. Business, customer, supplier, user information, infrastructure mapping information. And that allows us to take that information and to process it from information and knowledge. Gives us the ability to query and analyze this data, perform some predictive analysis, forecasting, planning, budgeting, allows us to do some comprehensive modeling, and more importantly, it allows us to monitor in real time as well as with predictive analysis to determine some of the outliers that are going to impact our business and allow us to be a lot more proactive than we currently are. As a result, we now make this information available to the processes and the people that need to use this, the folks in our organization, whether it's your HR department, your finance department, your legal department, or your IT department. This level of information is available through an enterprise system of work like ServiceNow for folks to be able to effectively manage change and release, manage the asset management life cycle, look at the technical configuration and the quality of information across the organization, and to be able to support folks across the organization as we look at incidents, problems, changes, security incident remediation, etc. So it's a full view of the design of this federated CMDB that's important to understand as you go in. Now, one of the nice things about ServiceNow, it comes with pretty much just a substantial amount of industry data and industry information around the classes and types of information of these configuration items as a baseline, but it also allows you to configure and customize this information in a way that's meaningful to your company. So you have the best of both worlds. You've got a lot of great industry best practice, as well as the ability to customize and to adjust the information to meet your business needs. So how do we do that? Well, we've got to look at a couple of things. And as I mentioned, ServiceNow has some standard relationships, some standard structures around business services, technology services, infrastructure components. And it allows us to really create a model that makes sense to our organization. So in this example, what we're seeing is the definition of a couple of levels of services within the organization. And the questions that you ask yourselves as you're designing this is, what types of services does my organization offer? As a bank, you'll be offering things like online banking, mortgage services, lending services. These are things that your customers, your external customers would consume. And it helps you to really level set the priority and the business impact of some of the components within the CMDB to help you make decisions on how and when to make updates to that infrastructure and those systems. The next level down is some of the technology systems or services, or internal services that make up the components of delivering those customer-facing services. So application service, data service, network WAN service. Those are components and functions of the organizations that have different technologies, different processes, different capabilities. It's important to be able to map that out, not only to understand all the components underneath each of those technology services, but to understand how they work together. So as we look at some of the other questions, who are the business customers? Knowing that will help us to establish what kind of data do we need to establish or have in the CMDB to best service those customers. What other services and infrastructure do those services rely on? Who are the suppliers? And what is the critical management and reporting information required to deliver the value back to the organization that we talked about? A lot of things to consider as you design, but as I mentioned, a lot of this comes with the baseline ServiceNow platform. With adding the context of your organization, it gets even more powerful. And so a perfect example of this is a company point of sale service. We have a number of services internally that look at the service view, hosting, network, point of sale. And underneath that, we have the infrastructure view. So we're able to map from the hosting service, Unix production hosting. Within that, we have shared Unix application servers. We have shared Unix database servers. And each of those relationships has a specific name and a specific weight. So, for example, Unix production hosting is hosted, runs on the shared Unix application server. The Unix high-end SCSI controller card is installed on the shared Unix application server. That allows us to establish not only an understanding of the relationship, but to understand the impact upstream and downstream of any decisions that you make as far as changing that technology, updating that technology, or if there's an outage or an issue in that technology. So the CMDB really needs to be able to give you this perspective, to be able to look at it and to be able to capture the right information across the spectrum. One of the great things about a CMDB is that the information captured at the class level, the hardware category in this case, is shared with all of the child class CIs underneath it. What that allows you to do is to be able to capture information across your technology and infrastructure, for example, without having to enter in information every time you add a new CI. there's a cascading effect here. So if there's a very specific set of information from the hardware category, for example, that will cascade down to the components within that family of CIs or that class of CIs, and allow you to minimize the amount of time that's required to update this information. There's a lot of interesting things to look at as we start to build that out. And as a result of all of that, what we're going to be able to have in ServiceNow, for example, is a view upstream and downstream of technology and business services that help us encapsulate the various functions and the reasons why we're doing this work. And we can look at all the components upstream and downstream and understand the impact and the required response to any situation. So it's a lot of context, a lot of information to share with in one system. Great. So we've really covered a lot of information thus far. Why do we need to do this? And it's not all, as we mentioned, it's not always evident, but it's important to keep that in mind because it's going to drive the data, types of information that you're going to capture. Once we've defined that model, we understand why we're doing this, we have to populate our CMDB. And the very first thing that folks tend to do and like to do is to turn on discovery or put together an integration and start to bring in data into ServiceNow. And it's a very interesting exercise. One of the things that happens is you're going to start to realize that you may, number one, not know some of the information that's out there. You may not have some of the environments ready to be discovered. And you may not know when you get that information back what you're looking at. So part of the opportunity here is to kind of look at and determine not only the amount of information that you want to capture, but you have to look at the kinds of information, and you have to think about it from the perspective of timing as well. What we recommend for a lot of organizations is to start with one source, one segment, one type of technology to start to look at and qualify all that. And there's a couple of key steps there. But before I get into some of that, I want to touch point on some of the various pieces of technology that may or may not be evident as sources of data for your CMDB. The first one is ServiceNow itself. ServiceNow has a very nice discovery function, and they have something called service mapping as well. And what it does is it allows us to discover across your infrastructure horizontally all the technologies that are out there, everything from your servers to storage to desktops to anything that you want to discover. ServiceNow is a great place to start for that. One of the benefits of doing it out of ServiceNow is that you can incorporate discovery into your response as you start to audit your CMDB, as you start to do work, for example, change management. Being able to integrate your processes for support like change management and be able to discover the very technology that you just updated in real time is very powerful. It allows you to control the amount of information that you get, allows you to schedule how often you get that information, but it ties in very nicely with the day-to-day processes that you might have in play. Service mapping is a little bit different. It allows you to map from the entry point of from a customer perspective, for example, down through your technology and look at the very specific pieces of technology that are part of that stream. It's almost like a trace route from a network perspective, but you're looking at it from a services perspective. If I wanted to access online banking, I'm going to log into my laptop. I'm going to go to a browser, and I'm going to go and type in the website for my bank. It's going to go to a web server. That web server is connected to a a router or a switch. That switch is connected to a number of backup devices and network devices. I'll be able to see that map in ServiceNow and understand that if a segment of my network is down, what specific service or am I impacting and how? And that's very powerful from a ServiceNow perspective. But there's also a lot of technology investments in other products, and as we mentioned, we're spending 70–80% of our time working on existing technologies. One of the opportunities here is to leverage that information and to integrate it into ServiceNow and to get some context of things that are not specifically just discoverable IP-based discovery information. So for example, starting with monitoring systems, we can connect to SolarWinds, Nagios, Big Panda, HP, etc., and we can start to get some information there. We can get raw events, we can get correlated events, we can get alerts from these systems, or we can process that information in ServiceNow and have the ability to correlate and analyze that within ServiceNow and update the CMDB with some very important information. Not only how that configuration item is configured, but how it's performing within the context of some good thresholds and some good information. Messaging and notification information is going to be coming in through various channels, whether it's Twilio, Exchange, TeleAlert, whatever, and it gives us some context around not only what's happening in the organization, but allows us to tie messaging and notification to a common nomenclature. So we're able to not only do work within ServiceNow and look at CIs from the perspective of CI, but we're also able to initiate messaging and a messaging bridge to be able to open up tickets and channels and communication and be able to reference the right information from a CMDB perspective. And that gives us more context to the CMDB itself. We have a view into operating systems and environments, which is an important part of our configuration management database. And we're going to not only pull that information in through discovery, but we're going to look at leveraging things like SCCM, among other things, to be able to pull that data in and get some context around may not be able to touch on from ServiceNow. One of the growing areas of integration and the touch points into the CMDB is cybersecurity. We have a lot of great products out there that go out and look at all of our endpoints. We have a lot of information out there that we might not have at our fingertips directly through ServiceNow. By integrating with this information and ensuring that we have a universal approach to all of the endpoints and all of the information in our environment, we're able to really understand the impact of those cyber events and cybersecurity information and process it within the context of the service and service mapping that we have to understand how best to respond to those things. And finally, we have the ability to connect to other IT service management tools. We have a lot of situations where organizations have outsourced certain parts of their infrastructure or certain parts of their support organization. And ServiceNow is able to integrate with those and to be able to share that information so that you understand what your vendors or your partners are doing within the context of your infrastructure or your environment. And one of the more interesting things recently is the advance and the advent of chatbot and AI integration. And within ServiceNow, the automated agent intelligence and the machine learning that's now a core part of the platform allows us to use predictive analysis and integration with these systems to be able to interact with users in a meaningful way, to be able to predict the kinds of things that they need and how they want to interact with us. And again, updating the CMDB with some very good context that is far over and above the typical IP level information that comes out of some of these systems. So that's a lot of information to digest. You wouldn't necessarily plug in all of these integrations at once. It's important to understand and process this information, and there is a bit of a process around that. And so when we talk about populating our CMDB, some of the key factors really come down to three very important questions. The first is identifying the information as it comes in. Is this CI already in my CMDB? And that's a very important question. The scenarios there are pretty important. We have a CI in our environment that's plugged into our network. We've discovered it, but it doesn't exist in our CMDB. Did we implement the change without going through the change management process? Did we install something in our environment that wasn't processed appropriately? Is somebody plugging into our environment that we don't know about? Or did we find an anomaly or something that we missed through an initial scan? It's important to identify this because it's important to understand whether this is going to be populated into CMDB. So as I mentioned at the early on, we don't want to have a perfect CMDB. We can't possibly have a perfect CMDB because we're going to find anomalies. We need to have a process in place to be able to manage these exceptions to the rules and to understand the impact of them and understand what to do with them. So that's a very important question. Does this already exist? And if it doesn't, why not? You'll also find, as a good example, we may have a number of assets in our environment and in our system. And if we can't find them, we need to determine what to do with that as well. We've made the capital investment. We've distributed technology, and for some reason, it's not there. There's some information in the CMDB that looks at the last time it was discovered. If something hasn't been on the network for a certain period of time, we have to ask the question why. And so it's important to have those kinds of capabilities right at the very beginning to be able to do that. Once we've established that the CI belongs in our CMDB, we have to build relationships. It's important for us to understand what is that piece of technology connected to? How is it connected to other technology? And what's the impact of that connection in the grand scheme of, as we mentioned, the service map? There's a number of different ways to do this. One of the easiest ways, depending on how you look at it, is to manually create a relationship, whether it's a logical relationship, whether it's a physical relationship. But you can say this laptop is connected to this server, and it has a very specific function, and this is the type of relationship. And ServiceNow has some predefined relationships that you can use to create those manual relationships. The reality is that that's very difficult to do from an effort perspective. And so what ServiceNow has done is taken a couple of approaches. They've created some standardized relationships and relationship mapping across the various functions of the CMDB. If a server is connected to a switch, the system can automatically determine that that connection is there and to establish a standard connection rather than having you create that manually. Discovery gives you the ability to make those connections, as does service mapping. You also will get some information from some external systems, and that will also give you the ability to map those relationships. But those things change over time, as you know, especially in the virtualized world. We see the movement of virtual instances, different hosts potentially. It's important to ensure that this CMDB schedule is set up to match the velocity and the amount of information that's changing within your organization to match that schedule. And that's part of one of the most important parts of really managing and mapping your CMDB. And finally, we look at reconciliation. And so we have the ability, as I mentioned earlier, to normalize data. We have the ability to add metadata and context to data. But we want to reconcile data and understand whether I should overwrite the data that's already in my CMDB with this new data. And it may seem fairly straightforward to say, Yeah, I went out and discovered something. The information changed. I'm going to go ahead and add that into the CMDB. Well, you may have 5 or 10 or more sources of information. And you've got to determine the priority of the information and which source of data is the most trusted source of data. And as such, you're going to have the opportunity to establish some reconciliation rules depending on really any business context or any technical context that makes sense to your organization. If you have one source of discovery and you believe that that source is up to date and you trust that implicitly, then reconciliation might not be as big of an issue, but you also want to reconcile if that information has changed, why has it changed? And there's certain areas that change very rarely. So if the MAC address, for example, changes on a machine, I would question that and ensure that there's a reconciliation rule in place to determine why that is and to determine what is the correct source of information. And so, as we've seen across the discussion today, we really want to level set why we're putting together the CMDB so that we can show value back to the organization. And in IT, that's one of the most important things to do, is to be able to show return on investment as quickly as possible. The quickest path to value is to be able to solve some of the business problems that you have in place. We've also seen that the values that we are trying to establish can change over time. This year we may have an audit issue. Next year we may have a financial issue. And we want to structure the CMDB to be fluid and to provide the level of information that's appropriate across really a very fluid world that we live in. Market demands change, technologies change. We need to be able to change our CMDB with it. And the most important part, I think, is looking at the ability to look at how correct, how up to date, what the anomalies are, and to be able to reconcile that information in a meaningful way. And you have to establish the business rules around that to ensure that you're getting the right level of information. You're taking the right steps to remediate the things that you find to be variances to your standard operating procedures. So in summary, we've seen there's a lot of work to be done in the CMDB. A lot of organizations are doing it. One of the things that I can really impart to you folks is that if you can introduce a way to do this into the general day-to-day work of folks, use this as an opportunity to automate some of the decisions that you make that take a lot of time, that go back and forth across a lot of different teams. Realize value as quickly as possible. Get commitment on folks incorporating and interacting with the CMDB. And you'll find that folks across the organization will benefit from it, from everything from the HR processes that are in place to your technology processes that are in place. They all leverage information on our enterprise assets, and there's a ton of value to be achieved here. And that's it for me today, folks. Jeff, over to you.
Awesome. Thanks very much, Alex. That was, as usual, very, very informative. So there are a number of questions to go through, which is great. So as a reminder, please use the question section that's part of the GoToWebinar dashboard if you have any questions on today's topic. So let me jump right in. So are there structured data standards or at least best practices for defining configuration items within a CMDB in terms of attributes, naming standards, relationship levels, etc.?
Good question. Absolutely. And I'm just going to quickly open up ServiceNow and show you as an example one of those. So if I go in here, ServiceNow comes with, I don't know the number, but a tremendous amount of classes of CIs. I think it's roughly about 4,000. So if I look at Windows, for example, we'll look at a Windows server. Windows servers have some standard information, that is common industry information. What is a Windows server? Where does it go? What is some of the information that I'm going to be able to capture and asset tag assigned to, can print, CD speed? There's 105 baseline pieces of information that you can leverage. There are some very specific ways to determine whether something is a Windows server, and we want to be able to correlate, analyze, and put this data in the right place. And ServiceNow has some standards around that. There's some standard reconciliation rules, but really you make your own reconciliation rules. And as I mentioned, as you'll see here, it's probably tough to see. There's some standard relationships across the spectrum. We have a tremendous amount of industry best practice baked into this platform, and it allows you to leverage that as a starting point. But then you add your own context. You say, you could have a field and their PCI compliance, yes or no. And you will know that that machine is part of PCI compliance and has a different set of rigor than something that's not, for example.
Okay, excellent. Does Alcor create the links, bridges between the data sources and ServiceNow? And is that normally part of an engagement?
Absolutely. So ServiceNow has, out of the gate, is a cloud technology, leverages best of breed technology from a cloud perspective. So we have the ability to leverage REST API, SOAP, we can do JDBC, ODBC. A lot of manufacturers are building integrations to ServiceNow as a standard. Everything from event management systems to security systems. And the configuration of those integrations, Alcor absolutely does. And we take a very specific approach to that. We look at what kind of connection are we able to leverage. REST API is obviously the preferred because as things change, the REST APIs get updated. We test those connections. We validate the data that comes across. We parse the XML payload. We load it into the system and look at the data, and then we start to process the schedule of how often to run that integration. And we look at it from both we can look at it bidirectional or unidirectional, and we even have the ability to create a process bus in the middle of that to help transact some of the brain power, if you will, to reconcile some of the variants.
Okay, so now there's a related question. What are some of the primary integrations to a CMDB?
Absolutely, that's a great question too. So as we said, starting with ServiceNow, the ability to go out and discover with the native functionality in ServiceNow. We see a lot of integrations from a monitoring perspective. I'll go back to that list. The integrations that Alcor specifically has done, and a lot of customers have done. Nagios, SolarWinds, PRTG. We just talked about that today from a monitoring perspective integration. We look at SCCM. We look at some of the Mac integrations. From a cybersecurity perspective, F5, ArcSight, we have Palo Alto Networks, we have Qualys, Tenable. Really, any system that's out there that's worth its weight in salt these days has an integration with ServiceNow or can integrate with ServiceNow pretty easily.
Okay. Okay. What are the basic costs for setting up a CMDB?
Yeah. Well, there's really two pieces to it. Number one is, as an organization, you need to invest the time and put the right people in a project to establish why you want to do the CMDB and how to design this thing to meet your long-term business needs. That's one of the biggest investments, but it's one of the most important investments. Getting champions in the organization of this process and this technology is important. The second is getting a platform in place like ServiceNow to ensure that you have an enterprise system of work and a centralized repository of all technology and all services to be able to interact with this information. From there, you're going to start to see some realization of cost savings as well. Folks are going to be doing more with less. You're going to be automating a lot of the work that traditionally is done today. You're going to be eliminating some of the technology that is legacy technology and frankly, it doesn't belong in your organization. And you're going to see more value out of some of the technology that you currently have and see better value out of it, quite frankly. Monitoring is probably the best example of that. Today we spend a lot of time and money monitoring and we don't get as much value out of it because there's a lot of white noise. Adding this service-centric focus through ServiceNow allows the folks who do monitoring to do a better job, to provide better information, and they become more actively engaged in doing the right things within the organization, and they burn less money.
Okay. What about short-lived assets, temporary VMs, containers, or apps? Can these be missed if the collection is not frequent enough?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, one of the things that you're going to look at in designing this is how deep do you want to go. You could literally map all of the ports on a switch, and the question I would have is why. If you're willing to maintain that information, if you can find value in that information, then you can absolutely map it and discover it. Are you going to miss things? Absolutely. But this is where you have the opportunity to touch point with things like vCenter, with some of the other systems that are out there that may provide some of that information. And if anything, just provide the context. If you know that you've got roughly 500 virtual instances running, in ServiceNow, you may not have to know all of the details around that, but you should be able to point back to vCenter and say, I need to find some specific information on an instance that I don't have in ServiceNow. Here's the information, and that conversation actually gets a lot better as well.
Okay, and last question is, how much effort is required to maintain a CMDB?
Yeah, best question out there. If we plan this thing properly, if we establish some guiding principles from a business perspective, some rules on how to go from identifying to mapping relationships to reconciling, our goal is to automate as much of this as possible. We don't want to go in there and manually enter things in. Frankly, it's prone to error. We want to minimize the amount of overhead from a people perspective. We want to maximize the value from the perspective of people. We're going to leverage, hopefully, performance analytics and predictive analysis to help us to do the things that we need to do proactively. So if done properly, the amount of effort should not be more than what you do today. And in fact, it should streamline and minimize some of the work some of the overhead that you do today.
Okay, excellent. Well, something just popped in. How should you staff for an enterprise size CMDB? How many analysts, how many developers?
So from a ServiceNow perspective, I think there's a value in having at least one person who's well trained on discovery, service mapping, ServiceNow in general. And you could always leverage a partner like Alcor. We have a managed services, a CMDB as a service, where we provide analysis for folks that don't have that. But separately, you want to open up access to some of the folks that I mentioned through the monitoring, messaging, cybersecurity, so that you don't have to bring in necessarily any more employees, but you're opening up the functionality and the tool to those folks. And as such, you'll start to see some economy of scale. But at a minimum, one good, solid analyst, ServiceNow admin in the organization, and or partner with a partner like Alcor to help you with that.
Okay. Excellent. Excellent. Well, lots of great questions, fantastic information today. So thanks, Aleks, and thanks everyone for joining. The recording of today's webinar will be available on our website, www.alcortech.com, and through our social networking sites. Thanks again for joining. See you all at the next webinar.